Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security-oriented policies to guide the state of Israel. It's a great pleasure today to be joined by Danny Seaman, the former director of the Government Press Office, and no stranger to these briefings. Danny, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing so we can bring you behind the headlines. And there's a major headline right now. If you check out CNN, at least 100 killed and 700 injured in chaotic incident in Gaza, officials say. And then right under that, IDF troops open fire on a queue for food. It does not make Israel, does not make the IDF look so good the way it's being portrayed right now. This is an event that is currently unfolding. So, Danny, it's great to have you with us. Please tell us what happened, tell us the truth, and tell us how it's being portrayed in the media.
Well, when you first read out the headline, I was surprised. I said, wow, CNN is giving you probably an honest, balanced report of what's going on, especially in contrary to how things were reported earlier this morning, which I'll mention in a moment. But then you go to the subheadline and it goes into immediately positioning it in a way that it looks like Israel did something. And this is not unusual. The incident is this: we've allowed humanitarian aid, food, to be brought in to the northern areas of Gaza. And that's interesting because up until now it's been the southern, because most of the citizens in Gaza have moved to the south. So supposedly these areas are empty. There are no civilians around there. And here you have, this week, Israel allowed them to bring in the humanitarian aid to the northern areas, where there are apparently tens of thousands of people still there, which is very interesting because if we're being accused of a genocide, so how come these people, tens of thousands of people, are still there and are not being hit by Israel? Now, there'll be those who also ask, why are we letting humanitarian aid come in there? It's a good question. It's another issue. But look at it in one particular way. Any aid coming in there is immediately taken over by Hamas. And what it does is, since the Hamas are walking around in civilian clothing, and I know this not only from the reports, my son was in that area just a few weeks ago, and he told me how they constantly walk around as civilians, and then at one point or another, they'll then open fire against Israelis because there's weapons spread all over. And one of the reasons they had these weapons in any house is that these Hamas terrorists know that if they're trying to hide from the Israelis, they can go into any house, any place, anywhere in Gaza, and they know exactly where the weapons are. And they discovered weapons every place. So now, since Israel has taken over most of the area there, they don't have that kind of freedom, but they're still roaming around waiting for opportunities. And they have weapons in grave sites. They have weapons in garbage dumps. They have them all over. So they roam around with the civilians. So this gives us actually an opportunity for these terrorists to reveal themselves. And we have the aerial footage. And by the way, the aerial footage that also sheds light on what actually happened there today, which I'll touch on in a moment. But just going back to this whole thing, it is an interest of Israel to allow the humanitarian aid, also because it gives the people some food there, but it allows us to differentiate between who are real civilians and who are the Hamas terrorists who are in that area. So what happened yesterday was that the aid came in, the people there just jumped on the aid. Now, Israel is not, it moves out of the area, lets the trucks come in, and the Israeli soldiers stay about 10 meters to 50 meters away. The terrorists who among the civilians there started getting the civilians to run in the direction of the IDF troops. And at some point, the IDF fired in the air. It didn't divert them away. They felt that they were threatened. IDF did open fire at those who were rushing towards our soldiers. There were several people hit in that, but that's not the main incident. The main incident, where there are apparently dozens, if not hundreds, of people hurt, injured, and killed, was because they tried and they assaulted the trucks coming in. And there were tens of trucks coming in with tens of tons of food, etc. And they were storming these trucks to get to that food before Hamas could take over and then first off give it to their own members and then sell it to the public instead of it being distributed. So Hamas opened fire on these people. We have that from aerial footage. And also the Egyptian truck drivers got nervous and they tried to escape from the area, tried to get away from the people who were assaulting them, and they ran over some of these people. So this is another one of these incidents. Now the Hamas and the Arab supporters of Hamas immediately tried to turn this into an international effort against Israel by creating just like they did with the hospital back 4 months ago, by creating the impression of something that Israel has done. So there'll be international pressure against Israel because they want in any way possible to stop the assault from continuing. So right now, they saw this as an opportunity, something they've done in the past. I mentioned that regarding the hospital. They call this the Rashid, the main highway there, or what's left of that highway, is called the Rashid Road. So they call it the Rashid Massacre, already implying that Israel massacred them there, and now the international community has to step in to stop Israel. There was also a similar incident back in the Lebanon War almost 20 years ago, when you had an incident called the Kfar Kana incident in Lebanon, in which they accused Israel of firing, which is legitimate, by the way. We took out positions that were firing at Israeli civilians, which makes it, regardless of where it was in that village, it was from a hospital, by the way. But the moment, according to the international guidelines and laws, the moment a location is used to fire against civilians, creating a war crime, we are well within our right. Any country is in its right to defend itself and take out that threat. So in Kfar Kana at the time, back in Lebanon, we took out that. And I remember making a whole issue about Israel killing civilians, and they brought in bodies, and they were taking out bodies from the locations that were supposedly hit by Israel. And the bodies were already in rigor mortis. And anybody who has the slightest understanding understands that if somebody is just hit, you don't have rigor mortis in bodies. So they brought in bodies to that location and created the impression that Israel had hit that. And one thing I said at the time to CNN, I was with the Prime Minister's office at the time, I said, look, Israel's first responsibility is the defense of its own people. We cannot be more responsible for the Lebanese at that time than the Lebanese themselves, or the Hezbollah in that case. The same way here. We cannot be more responsible for the citizens in Gaza than Hamas. They're the ones who are responsible for it. They're the ones who have to protect these people. Our first responsibility are our troops. Now, when this aid is coming in there, and you have this disruption going on, which is done deliberately by Hamas, and this happens in South Gaza as well, but they're in control of that area, and therefore they walk around with their weapons openly, so none of the public come towards the aid coming in and to the food coming in. Here it was a bit different, which allowed the people to rush it. And then they pulled out their weapons that they were hiding and opened fire there. So I would say here again, remember the incidents from the past. Remember the hospital incident. There are two things wrong with the media here. They're more than happy to cooperate with the propaganda coming from Hamas and put the blame on Israel, but also their employees, even if they wave this flag of, oh, our reporters are reporting that, we all know today that anybody employed in the Gaza Strip by the foreign press are active members of Hamas. They could not work there had they not been. So we know that as a fact right now. So instead of these media organizations being exceptionally cautious at the moment and being responsible, not only for Israel, for you, for those of you tuning in here right now, they owe you to give you the information in an exact way. That's their job, not to try to tell you what to think. But we all know that that's no longer happens in the Western world today. So you should be very critical of the news coming out. Listen, if Israel did anything wrong there or was any mistake made on the part of Israel, we'll admit it. We never hide these things. But right now, it's more likely an exaggeration of a situation with the attempt to point the finger towards Israel.
Thank you, Danny, for that. It's amazing that the incident just happened and Abbas, had a prepared statement. Jordan condemned. Somehow these incidents occur and the world jumps on them, which leads me to ask, we know.
Sorry for interrupting, but they know something like this is going to happen. It always happens. Now, I was also a paratrooper. I fought in the First Lebanon War back in 1982. The first casualties we had in the 890th Paratrooper Brigade was from our own Air Force. You have what they call friendly fire. Believe me, it wasn't that friendly. It was horrific. But we lost 5 soldiers on the third day of the war in Lebanon when we were hit by our own Air Force, and it happens everywhere. So they know that you're going to have circumstances as such, so they're just waiting for the opportunity to come out with their self-righteous statements.
Well, let me ask you though, are they waiting for the opportunity on the media front, or are they potentially creating the opportunity on the ground? Meaning, we always hear these stories of actors who pretend, for atrocities to happen. And no doubt horrible things have happened in Gaza, but I'm curious, to what extent do you think they are creating these scenarios in order to build the media campaigns?
Well, it's opportunism, taking advantage of a situation, but there are a lot of things going on. Look, one of the first things we are accused of is that for years we were told that Gaza is an open air prison, that the situation there is so horrific. They needed to have these flotillas come in to save these people. And now you have these bleeding heart stories of, oh, the poor Gaza. And I'm sure anybody on social media sees these images of what Gaza used to look like, and look what it looks like today because of Israel. I usually answer to those things. I tell them, here's a lesson to be learned. Don't screw around with Israel. Be very cautious when you try to mess with Israel. This is the consequence of it. But suddenly they are giving these images of what a wonderful place Gaza is compared to what it looks like at the moment. So they are doing these things. I think it's horrific what Israel has been doing to dolls. Apparently, we've murdered a lot of dolls, and they bring out these dolls that are like babies, and they put them out there. And we may be accused of war crimes against plastic dolls. If the situation is so bad, why do they need to bring in dolls? Why do they have to have acting classes? Why do they have to take footage and images that were from Syria at the refugee camps in Syria back in the Syrian civil war? Why do they have to do all of that? Is what Israel is doing is so horrific. But they do that. They do create these kind of images because they know that today, most people, especially those who are looking to be critical of Israel, don't wait around. They take whatever is being printed and put out there, and immediately using that to elevate their arguments and to show what a horrible country and what terrible things Israel is doing, with the hope that this will pressure their own governments into stop twisting the arm of Israel. And it worked in the past. One of the things that happened now, or that brought us to the circumstances of October 7th, was not only the intelligence mistake that we had here. Worse than the intelligence mistake was the fact that Israel, for over 20 years, I would say even longer than that, it goes all the way back to the Oslo process, for over 30 years now, has been willing to tolerate what no country in the world, it could be suicide bombings, it can be the missiles being fired. Every few months we had another incident with Gaza exploding. And then we knew if it was a serious one, it would last for 7 days to 10 days. And we knew there was always a clock started working, that we knew we had a few days, and then the international pressure will pressure Israel to stop. So what it created within Israeli military, at least, and government, was this attitude that we have to be very cautious. We don't want things to escalate. And every time they were escalating it, and it brought us to the circumstances of October 7th, where we were not ready. Because even when we had the intelligence coming around, we have to be careful so things don't escalate. While they keep escalating all the time. By the way, similarly to what's going on right now with Lebanon, though the circumstances there at the moment are different because we don't want to divert attention beyond what is happening at the moment. So you have all of this happening, and for many years, Israel allowed them. And so we knew that you had between a week to 10 days, and they would also create these kind of circumstances, real or made up, that would increase international pressure against Israel. Now that doesn't happen. And I can tell you just from my own relatives or anybody I know in the south of Israel, from Ashkelon, I've mentioned it before, I'm originally from Ashkelon, my family is still there. You talk to the people there, every one of these events that escalated over the years, the people in the south, Sderot, Ashkelon, Beersheba, would say, we want the government to continue. We want them to end it now. So today we're in a situation where any government, any politician in Israel realizes the public will not accept anything except putting an end to the threat to the Israelis. So it doesn't matter what they do. They can continue doing these things. They can make their pathetic speeches. It may last for a day or so. 2 days from now, there will be something else that people will be talking about.
Thank you, Danny. So we have many viewers who are writing into the chat here, and I'm seeing something which I see almost every day. which is people write in, we're preaching to the choir, right? We should take this message, this conversation, and bring it to media outlets who are critical, who are antagonistic to Israel. Why are we bothering speaking to an audience who is presumably kind of on our side, so to speak, and very Zionist? And not a day goes by, I have to tell you, not a day goes by where I don't get an email from one of our wonderful viewers who gives me a recommendation of a media source to reach out to. And I always try to say, amazing, why don't you help and reach out to that media source? But then let me ask you a question. Why is it relevant for us to have this conversation, to present this type of information to the Zionist pro-Israel community? Why are we not wasting our time right now? What do you answer to that question?
Very simply, what would they have known had you not, Moshe, been doing this briefing for the past 4 months, 145 days now almost? What would people have known? Now, I know there are other very good groups who are also doing briefings. We're just one of them. You need to, because unfortunately today, the media, with very few exceptions, are all positioned politically in a way that's not favorable to Israel. And it's not enough to get, I worked with public diplomacy back 10 years ago with the government of Israel. And at that time was when this was, again, one of the operations in Gaza back then. It was in November of 2012. And that was the first time we used social media. And I remember the government officials are patting themselves on the back. We did a great job because it was the first time that Israel's message came out very strongly. And it wasn't, believe me, it wasn't the government, I know. We opened ourselves up to volunteers from the public, and we were expecting, to have a group of kids, I'm talking about college-age students, come in and help us man the phones and call the Jewish organizations or supporters of Israel. It was very pathetic compared to what happened in reality. In reality, we had over several hundred, around 400 young people from the university speaking several languages, Israelis and foreigners, and they came with the social media. I didn't even have Facebook, by the way, at that time. I thought it was an invasion of privacy, but these kids were all really involved in that. And they took over and they were working. And when it was over, I told the prime minister, very long story short, I said to the prime minister when we were summarizing the event that, and I know him for almost 40 years, I said, Mr. Prime Minister, I saw a game changer. This was the first time that we were able to get our message out there, and it wasn't because of the government, it was because of the public. And that's why it's so important today. You can see that there wasn't even this concept of influencers back then 10 years ago. That's something that developed now. So you have these people who are far more effective even than the mainstream media and all these media outlets. So these kind of things are important. But what is the most important thing is having the knowledge, having the facts. So when we do these briefings, we provide you with that kind of angle, and it's it trickles down. It's like this pyramid scheme, the opposite. We give you, we're from the top, and you start spreading it. And it doesn't have to be forced. You don't have to start going in. What I do personally today, I just go and troll all these pro-Arab places and just try to piss them off. But I've learned, and I think I mentioned this once in our other briefing with my kids, that when they were speaking to their peers, if they were trying to engage, it's very hard to give facts when somebody's spouting these lies and propaganda and things that sound good and look appropriate or the right kind of message. When Israel's position is a bit more difficult to get across. So I told my kids at the time, just curse the guy out. And why did I do this? Because we found out that the other kids, oh, why is he cursing him out? And it actually happened. They contact my sons afterwards and they said, oh, yeah, it was very cool how you cursed that guy out. And then they want to know what the facts are, at least from our position. It's a very interesting angle to that. So I'm not saying that we do that because we're a bit more older and more mature, at least some of us. Here it is that you have friends, you have relatives, you have people who aren't that involved. And I say it's like tic-tac-toe. Anybody over the age of 4 knows that you can't win at tic-tac-toe. Their arguments are X's, our arguments are O's, but eventually nobody wins there. And it's like 30-some% support their side, 15% support our side. You can't affect them just as they aren't going to affect you. Who we're trying to affect is that 60 to 70% of people who don't really know. And you do that in a lot of means. One of it is getting these kind of information and giving simple things to let them question. You don't have to argue with them. Just let them question what they think that they know is fact. And if you can get these things from the briefings we're giving you and get sort of understandings of how things are, the background, or even some arguments, that's why you need to do this. So it's not preaching, it's strengthening your knowledge and your ability to be out there as a foot soldier for the state of Israel in the arena of cognitive warfare.
Danny, before we began, you gave me a cliffhanger about recent stats that were out in the U.S. About the Israel community. Share that, please, with everyone and myself.
It was interesting. People were kind of worried that since October 7th, despite everything that's been seen, despite the fact that the terrorists themselves were airing the material, the lies coming out were being adopted automatically. Israel was being accused. You had all these demonstrations and marches. So people were saying Israel is losing the support. They were saying this is happening, and you have that here. And they have a poll in the United States, and it's 45% of people are against Israel, 10% more than happened before. The media here immediately uses that, says, oh my God, we're losing the support of Americans. So there was this concern here in Israel. And there are those who want to elevate that concern. But then you look at what was done. You had the elections going on in Michigan this week, and you have Super Tuesday coming up. And you can see that people polled in serious polls conducted by not pro-Israeli media outlets in the United States showed that over 80% of Americans support Israel. And even in Michigan, which is a very democratic place, which is controlled, you have a large Muslim, I don't even think they're a minority anymore there. But the point is they were trying to create some kind of movement to put pressure on Biden, and it didn't work. Maybe they got 5% more than they did in the past. But this certainly is not a majority of Americans. And they're not being able to resonate it outside of their own circle of people, like I said, that 35% that already support them anyway. And when I say 35%, I take Asian countries and European countries. Certainly, if you just concentrate on the United States and maybe some Western European countries, they don't even reach 35%. But automatically, there's like 1 billion Muslims and Arabs around the world. And if you take Christian supporters of Israel, and if you said every Jew is supportive of Israel, which we know is not the case, we can't go over 70 million, maybe best case scenario, 100 million. So we're at a disadvantage automatically. So here you see this poll, and it's very interesting to see, despite all their efforts, despite everything they've done, and the demonstrations, I actually think, and I was actually pleased with these demonstrations because, the Arabs have this case of getting themselves riled up. And I say this, you look at the history, you take the 6-Day War, you take other events, they will get themselves riled up into believing something, and then they get caught up in the moment, and then they lose control. Basically, they turn to violence. And this is what is happening in those demonstrations in the United States, Canada, and Europe. And I said that this kind of thing is benefiting Israel because the public are seeing exactly who and what we are dealing with. And when they see that, then they're more open to hear some of the other things that is going on. And when we say that Israel is just the first one, we're in a battle here against the international jihadist movement, and we're just the first. It's going to affect you too. Suddenly people are realizing that. So these polls that came out after the elections in Michigan are showing that they're not able to carry the American public. The American public are very supportive of Israel, whether it's Democrat or Republicans. Even among the younger generation, they are now, maybe with the rise of anti-Semitism, who's come as a consequence of this hatred directed towards Israel, people are starting to realize, and by the way, this is in every event over the years, this has happened. As I mentioned before, we usually had a 7 to 10 days ability knowing before there'll be international pressure. So the truth of many of the incidents only came out after the events were over. There was also not social media at the time. So today, if we had an incident with the hospital, and we did have incidents like that in the past, you would only know about the real facts after the combat was over and Israel was pressured to either make concessions or to have some kind of ceasefire. Today, especially because of the length of things, but also, and this goes back to the other topic we were talking about, due to social media, a lot of the facts get out there very quickly. So even if you have somebody who's not pro-Arab, and by the way, the media, that's who they're trying to affect, the general public who don't know. So if they're getting this thing that the Rashid massacre And they're hearing that, and they're already using a key word to try to create an impression of a situation. So if they didn't have those of you listening here who can publish on their own social media outlets that, wait a minute, the A, B, C, or D, they would just get that one side of things. So social media, the length of what is going on right now, the fact that people are getting the truth out there, that makes it helpful to Israel, and that's why it's affecting public opinion.
Danny, we only have 2 minutes left. I know you spent some valuable time today with soldiers. What can you share about that experience?
I went to pick up my daughters with the Givati unit, Givati Brigade. They were in Gaza up until the day before yesterday. Unfortunately, they lost their commander there, Major Eyal Shuminov, sorry, who was killed in action, and they lost a few other soldiers. So I went to pick her up to bring her home, and I took some of the soldiers to the train station, a few of them to some of their homes along the way. And I discussed with them what they were seeing and what was going on. Morale is very high despite the loss. They carried the pain of the loss with them, but they're very dedicated. And just to tell you to what degree, and this gives you an idea, one of the soldiers has a farm. His parents create goat cheese, and they had employees from abroad who left when the war broke out, have not come back. And goat cheese is a very finesse, I understood from talking to him. Manufacturing, you can't just have volunteers come in and help them out with this. His parents are he's still in combat. He can't take off, though my daughter, she's a social worker for the battalion. She tried to convince him, it's important to go and help your family out. Your whole livelihood of the family depends upon that. He says, no, I'm going to be here. We're fighting. He says, my family won't even have that livelihood if we don't defend the state of Israel. There was another young man who's a lone soldier from Belgium. And he came, he's a little older than the rest, and he's fighting in combat. His family situation took a turn for the worse when his father passed away from cancer while he was here. But then after the war broke out, his mother, for whatever reason, had mental problems and has been institutionalized while the war has been going on. I don't think it has anything to do, I guess it didn't help her much, the fact that he was in combat. But he has two younger brothers. And his best friend, a Jewish friend of his in Belgium, told him, don't worry, you stay there, do what you feel is necessary. His best friend is helping raise his two younger brothers. And we're talking about kids in their mid-20s. They're still young. They may be older than the average soldier. So his friend in Belgium is helping him out so he can concentrate on what needs to be done here. And I said to him, look, you guys are on vacation now. You can go home. He says, no, we have a mission and we have a job to do. And it's very important. The future of the Jewish people in the state of Israel relies on every one of us. So these kids who just came out of the battle this week, they lost their commander, they lost some friends. They're still so dedicated and so committed. As we said, our greatest generation is right now.
Danny, thank you so much. That is so true. And it's meaningful to end the week of briefings on that note. So thank you, Danny Seaman, for joining me. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters, and keeping in line with this idea of sharing this knowledge coming out of Israel. If every single person who's participating, who's viewing this briefing now, if you get one person to sign up and join our briefing at the end of the weekend, come Monday morning, we will quite literally double our audience. So I give you that challenge, find one person to register and join these briefings come Monday. With that, everyone should stay safe, stay strong, take care.